This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
A tree planting campaign was launched in the western region in Bni Abbas by representatives of several youth organizations and associations as part of the major initiative launched by the Ministry of Youth along the Bashar Tindouf Garage Bilet railway line. The platform Don't Forget Western Sahara has warned that a new agreement between the EU and Morocco that includes Western Sahara will be not only legally fragile but also politically irresponsible, stressing that no legal maneuver can circumvent the fundamental principle established by the Court of Justice of the European Union. As the Palestinian National Council accused the Israeli authorities of deliberately sabotaging the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, several Palestinians were killed in the continuing airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. Good afternoon. First in our news, a tree planting campaign was launched in the Tib el-Bala region in Bni Abbas by representatives of several youth organizations and associations as part of the major initiative launched by the Ministry of Youth along the Bashar Tindouf Garage Bilet railway line. The initiative is part of the National Reforestation Program aimed at supporting strategic government projects and strengthening the environmental dimension in the implementation of major infrastructure projects, in particular the railway project linked to the Garage Bilet mine, which is of economic and strategic importance. The operation also aims to strengthen the participation of young people in environmental protection, the fight against desertification, and the improvement of the ecological environment of major national projects, thus demonstrating young people's awareness of their active role in supporting the process of sustainable national development and the promotion of culture of environment citizenship as a pillar of youth action. The platform Don't Forget Western Sahara has warned that a new agreement between the European Union and Morocco that includes Western Sahara will be not only legally fragile but also politically irresponsible, stressing that no legal maneuver can circumvent the fundamental principle established by the Court of Justice of the European Union. Mariam Bershi has more details.
The Court of Justice of the European Union, CJEU, established Morocco's lack of sovereignty over Western Sahara, which has been classified as a non-self-governing by the UN since 1963, in response to the announcement of the upcoming opening of negotiations between the EU and Morocco on a new fisheries agreement. The platform stressed that one fundamental question remains unanswered, which is whether the EU is prepared to accept the consequences of its own decisions, or will it continue to seek to circumvent them. According to the platform, the green light given last Wednesday by EU member states to the European Commission to start negotiations with Morocco for a new fisheries agreement, despite the European Court of Justice's invalidation of previous agreements concluded with Rabat, paves the way for a scenario of high political and legal risks. It said that any new agreement that directly or indirectly includes the waters of Western Sahara without the express consent of the Sahrawi people will be subject to further legal action, likely with the same outcome. In 2024, the European High Court invalidated the fisheries and agricultural agreements between the EU and Morocco, ruling that these agreements violated the rights to self-determination and consent of the people of Western Sahara. In its rulings, the Court of Justice of the European Union reaffirmed a precedent established in 2016, stating that Western Sahara is a territory distinct and separate from Morocco, and no agreement can extend to this territory without the consent of the Sahrawi people represented by the Polisario Front.
MP of the Spanish party Podemos, Iran Montero, has reaffirmed the inalienable right of the Sahrawi people to self-determination, which is key to resolving the situation in occupied Western Sahara. During her visit to the Sahrawi refugee camps, which began on Thursday, accompanied by a European parliamentary delegation, the MP reaffirmed her continued support for the just Sahrawi cause and the legitimate struggle of the Sahrawi people to obtain their full rights, in particular the right to self-determination and independence. In the same context, Ms. Montero expressed her regret at what she described as the shameful positions of certain European states on the Sahrawi question. She stated that silence or political complicity with the Moroccan occupier only prolongs the suffering of the Sahrawi people and undermines the credibility of the European discourse on human rights and respect for international law. The delegation visited several facilities in the province of Awserd, including a school for people with special needs and the Agouini district. It also visited the headquarters of the Sahrawi Red Crescent, where it was received by the institution's president, Bouhbini Yahya, who highlighted urgent needs in various areas. As the Palestinian National Council accused the Israeli authorities of deliberately sabotaging the ceasefire agreement in the Gaza Strip, several Palestinians were killed in the continuing airstrikes on the enclave. Mariam Barshazmor.
One Palestinian girl has died of wounds sustained during the bombardment carried out by the Israeli army against the northern part of the Gaza Strip. Local sources said the drone attack targeted a shelter in Beit Lahia. At least 10 Palestinians were killed in a series of airstrikes launched by the Israeli forces against various areas of the enclave, including the southern region of Khan Yunis. In this connection, the head of the Palestinian National Council, Rawhi Fatouh, stressed that the Israeli authorities were undermining the US peace plan by pursuing massacres and by setting obstacles to the work carried out by the committee entrusted within managing the Palestinians' daily life. Such a behavior, he went on to say, reflected the Israeli government's premeditated intention to perpetuate the Palestinian people's daily sufferings and the disastrous situation prevailing in the Gaza Strip, emphasizing that such actions and daily attacks are mainly aimed at dealing a blow to any serious political process. In this connection, the councillor of the Rafah municipality, Ahmed al-Soufi, denounced the Israeli government's attempts to torpedo the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, whose second stage has just started.
The
other party, namely the Israeli occupation, is violating this agreement. Meanwhile, the city of Deir al-Balah is being bombed, resulting in the martyrdom of a number of Palestinians. This constitutes a violation and a major breach of the agreement. The war constitutes amid a global blackout regarding what is happening in the Gaza Strip. Through talk of diplomatic efforts and the formation of committees, we hope that we will move to the second and third phases, that there will be a path towards achieving a Palestinian. We hope we will move to the second and third phases, and that there will be a path towards achieving Palestinian rights, establishing a Palestinian state, and the right of return for displaced and suffering Palestinians. This will be achieved without the support of Arab and Islamic countries, especially major brotherly nations like Egypt, Algeria, Saudi Arabia, and other leading Islamic countries.
Over 550 Palestinians have been killed in the attacks carried out by the Israeli occupying army in violation of the ceasefire enforced last October.
And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the incursion recently carried out by the Israeli occupying forces into a health center run by UNRWA in occupied Al-Quds in the West Bank. His spokesperson Farhan Haq condemned the temporary closure of the center, which he recalled is a UN property.
The Secretary General strongly condemned the Israeli authorities' unlawful entry on the 12th of January 2026 into United Nations property in occupied East Jerusalem, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency Jerusalem Health Center, and the order of its temporary closure. The Secretary General is also deeply concerned that UNRWA has been informed that utility providers will soon cease supplying electricity and water services to multiple UNRWA facilities in occupied East Jerusalem. The Secretary General deeply regrets that the Israeli authorities have continued to take further action inconsistent with its obligations under international law, including the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. The Secretary General urges the government of Israel to immediately take steps to return and restore the UNRWA Sheikh Jarrah compound and the UNRWA Jerusalem Health Center, and to ensure that essential utilities to UNRWA premises are maintained.
Evoking reports issued by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has stressed that additional temporary learning sites had been renovated in Gaza to help children receive education.
The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that 10 additional temporary learning sites in the Gaza Governorate have been renovated so far this month. Overall, more than 440 spaces are now operational, serving about 270,000 students with the help of more than 6,300 teachers. We again call for the lifting of restrictions on education supplies, including stationery, so that more children can receive education. We and our partners also continue to support people affected by the recent winter storms. This week, more than 200 tents were distributed to families alongside thousands of tarpaulins, blankets, warm clothes, cooking and serving utensils, and solar lights. As a reminder, more than 1 million people across the Gaza Strip still urgently need shelter assistance and durable shelter solutions, including repairs to damaged homes and emergency shelter kits.
The UN chief recalled that the UN Court of Justice recently confirmed that any executive, administrative, legal, or legislative action that run counter the assets or properties of the UN is banned by the Convention of the UN Privileges and Immunities. The UN Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations Jean-Pierre Lacroix has expressed serious concern over the escalating aggression by the Zionist army against the personnel of the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, operating in the country's south. Speaking via video conference to the press in New York, Lacroix warned that peacekeepers' safety is increasingly at risk, evoking a rise in hostile incidents by the Zionist entity that restricts UNIFIL's freedom of movement and endanger its personnel with potential serious consequences. During a field visit near the Blue Line in southern Lebanon, Mr. Lacroix highlighted the scale of destruction caused by Zionist attacks, noting that numerous villages have been destroyed, preventing the return of civilians. He nevertheless expressed hope that conditions would soon allow displaced communities to return home. He reaffirmed that UNIFIL will continue its operations until that date, with no plans to reduce troop numbers, and reiterated the mission's commitment to supporting the Lebanese army or armed forces and implementing Resolution 1701. A ceasefire agreement came into force in Lebanon on November 27, 2024, providing for the withdrawal of Zionist occupation forces from southern border villages within 60 days. The Lebanese government later agreed to extend the deadline until February 18. However, the occupation army remains deployed at 5 locations and continues to commit violations. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Barham Salih, has warned of an urgent humanitarian crisis during his visit to Chad, calling for increased protection and assistance for refugees fleeing the conflict in Sudan. Mariam Bersh has more.
Speaking with displaced Sudanese families in refugee camps, Mr. Salih heard first-hand accounts from people who had escaped recent violence in Darfur. Many said they had been displaced multiple times since the conflict began. He described the situation as a humanitarian catastrophe and praised Chad for its solidarity in hosting refugees. Since April 2023, more than 900,000 Sudanese have fled to eastern Chad, adding to the 4.3 million people already displaced in the region. Sudan is now facing the world's worst displacement crisis, with an estimated 12 million people forced from their homes. Although UNHCR continues to provide assistance, living conditions in the camps remain dire, with shortages of shelter, clean water, sanitation, and medical services. Mr. Saleh urged the international community to step up funding and support, stressing that Chad cannot shoulder the burden alone. During talks with President Mohamed Idris Deby Itno in Jamena, Mr. Saleh reaffirmed UNHCR's commitment to supporting both refugees and host communities. Meanwhile, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, is on a 5-day visit to Sudan. He has met with authorities, civil society and displaced communities in Port Sudan and Dongola, describing the testimonies he heard as heartbreaking.
I'm currently in Dongola, which is the capital of northern state. It's by the river Nile, and I've met with national authorities. I've met, as you can see from behind, with local representatives of civil society organizations, NGOs, international NGOs, and so forth. And what they are telling me is about the horrible plight that many people, many survivors of this horrific war are going through every day.
Mr. Turk called for stronger support, stressing that considerable efforts are needed to enable Sudanese civil society to provide assistance where it is most needed.
And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin for today. Time now for a weekly program with our colleague Mas'ud Sharfi. As for me, I'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin. Thank you and stay tuned.
Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. Today we bring you a special report on COP30, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, taking place in Belém, Brazil, in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. This year's summit carries enormous weight. It marks a decade since the Paris Agreement. Governments are expected to present stronger, more credible climate commitments. The choice of Belém as the host city highlights a simple truth. There can be no stable climate without healthy forests, thriving biodiversity, and the protection of indigenous peoples who safeguard these ecosystems. COP30 has brought together governments, UN agencies, scientists, civil society, youth movements, and financial institutions, all working to define the next decade of global climate action. From the very first session, COP30 adopted a tone of urgency, balanced with cautious optimism. Delegates note clear progress. Emissions are slowly declining, renewables are expanding fast, and markets are shifting. But the gap between current efforts and what the climate crisis demands remains significant. Talks focus on accelerating the energy transition while ensuring fairness for developing nations. UN Climate Chief Mr. Simon Style said that emissions are falling, renewables are leading energy, and the focus is being on a fair transition with more clean energy and efficiency.
10 years ago in Paris, we were designing the future, a future that would clearly see the curve of emissions bend downwards. The emissions curve has been bent downwards because of what was agreed in halls like this, with governments legislating and markets responding. But I'm not sugarcoating it. We have so much more work to do. Renewables overtook coal this year as the world's top energy source. Investments in clean energy and infrastructure will hit another record high this year, with investments in renewables outstripping fossil fuels 2-to-1. Because we have already agreed we will transition away from fossil fuels. Now's the time to focus on how we do it fairly and orderly, focusing on which deals to strike to accelerate the tripling of renewables and doubling energy efficiency.
This moment represents a turning point, a test of whether global ambition can finally match global necessity. A key theme at COP30 is the transformation of the global energy map. Renewables now dominate new power capacity, attract record investment, and reshape national economies, yet major hurdles persist. Many countries still lack grids, storage, and financing to scale clean energy. Delegates are exploring ways to support emerging economies through technology transfer and stronger infrastructure. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that renewables now lead new power, outpacing fossil fuels, calling for faster action to meet COP28 targets for renewables and efficiency.
The global energy landscape is changing at lightning speed. Last year, 90% of new power capacity came from renewables. Global investment in clean energy reached $2 trillion, 800 billion more than fossil fuel. Renewables are now the cheapest source of new electricity in nearly every country. They are powering prosperity and empowering communities long left in the dark. Every dollar invested in renewables creates 3 times more jobs than a dollar invested in fossil fuels, and clean energy jobs now outnumber fossil fuel jobs worldwide. The renewables revolution is here. But we must go much faster and ensure all nations share the benefits. At COP28, countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels in a just, orderly and equitable manner, and to triple renewable energy capacity and double energy efficiency by 2030. The mandate is clear. Now we must close the delivery gap.
While the clean energy revolution is advancing quickly, COP30 insists that it must now advance equitably, lifting both developed and developing nations. Another major pillar of COP30 is the review of nationally determined contributions, or NDCs. These commitments show how prepared countries are to cut emissions and protect vulnerable communities. Early assessments reveal progress, but still far from the scientific pathway required to limit warming. That gap has sparked intense debate about ambition and accountability. Mr. Guterres said that current climate plans fall short. A temporary 1.5 degrees Celsius overshoot is inevitable, and urgent action with deep emissions cuts is needed to stay on track.
Nationally determined contributions have been a barometer of countries' climate ambitions. The latest NDCs represent some progress, but we must be honest in the summit of truth. The plans and policies on the table are still far from enough. Science tells us it is still possible to keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Yet, a temporary overshoot above 1.5 degrees, starting at the latest in the early 2030s, is now inevitable. But we can manage the scale and duration of that overshoot and bring temperatures back down if you take serious action now. And action requires deep emissions cuts, 60% by 2035, to stay on track to meeting 1.5. The new NDCs deliver just a 10% reduction. We need an acceleration plan to close the gaps in NDC ambition and implementation, and that acceleration must start here in Belém.
COP30 is now widely described as a summit of truth, where the world must decide whether to close the ambition gap or accept the consequences of delay. Forests are central to this year's conference. In Belém, the Amazon stands as a vivid reminder of what's at stake. It regulates rainfall, stores enormous carbon reserves, and sustains millions, including indigenous communities. Brazil has placed forest protection, indigenous rights, and nature-based solutions at the center of COP30. Delegates are discussing how to value standing forests, reduce deforestation, and fund forest nations. The UN Secretary General said that the Tropical Forest Forever facility makes forests more valuable than cleared land, and stressed halting and reversing forest loss by 2030.
Tropical forests are vital to climate stability. They protect water and soils, store and remove billions of tons of carbon, regulate rainfall, shape weather patterns across continents, and sustain millions of people. Without tropical forests, there is no path to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We are dangerously close to a tipping point that could push these ecosystems beyond recovery. Crossing that line would unleash droughts, fires, and biodiversity loss on a scale humanity cannot control. We have pledged to halt and reverse forest loss by 2030. Now we must deliver. That means supporting forest nations, not as a favor, but as a shared duty, cutting emissions from deforestation and preserving forests' immense capacity to store carbon.
These discussions underline a fundamental reality. Protecting forests is not optional. It is foundational to the global climate stability. Finance remains the most difficult issue across all climate conferences. Developing nations facing the worst impacts are demanding predictable, scaled-up support. Negotiations are focusing on long-term climate finance, reform of development banks, more concessional loans, and new financial tools. Delegates are also debating the design of a global loss and damage fund. The Secretary General urged closing the climate finance gap, mobilizing the $300 billion pledge, and boosting support to help developing countries meet Paris commitments.
We must close the financing gap foremost mitigation and adaptation. To keep the 1.5 degrees limit alive and deliver universal energy access, annual clean energy investment in developing countries outside of China must rise more than fivefold by 2030. Developing countries can't get there alone. The 300 billion promised to developing countries by 2035 must be fully mobilized. The Baku to Belém roadmap to $1.3 trillion by 2035 must restore confidence that climate finance will flow predictably, fairly and at scale. Multilateral development banks, as President Lula said, must be made bigger, bolder and better able to leverage far greater private investment at affordable cost. Innovative forms of finance must be developed, including debt for climate swaps, risk-sharing mechanisms and bold instruments like the Tropical Forest Forever Fund, not forgetting the contribution of carbon markets. And we must keep pressing forward on reforms of the global financial architecture so it reflects today's world and serves the needs of developing countries. At COP30, let's renew the great promise the world made a decade ago in Paris by kick-starting a new decade of implementation and acceleration.
The question of climate finance will likely determine whether COP30 is remembered as a breakthrough or another missed opportunity. Despite progress in renewables, current global trajectories still lead to dangerous warming. The window to keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius is closing quickly. COP30 has therefore become crucial for outlining what must be done. Deeper emissions cuts, a faster fossil fuel phase-out, and major investment in clean systems centered on people and equity. Mr. Guterres warned the warming will exceed 2 degrees Celsius without urgent action and called for halving emissions by 2030, achieving net zero by 2050 and supporting a just clean energy transition globally.
Even if new national commitments are fully implemented, the world is still heading for clearly more than 2 degrees of warming. That means more floods, more heat, more suffering everywhere. Scientists tell us that overshooting 1.5 degrees is now inevitable, starting at the latest in the early 2030s. But how high and how long that overshoot lasts depends on the speed and scale of our actions today. To return below 1.5 degrees by century's end, global emissions must fall by almost half by 2030, reach net zero by 2050, and go on with net negative afterwards. So what must we do? First, provide clarity and coherence, align laws, policies and incentives with a just energy transition, and eliminate fossil fuel subsidies that distort markets and lock us into the past. Second, put people and equity at the center of the transition. Support workers and communities whose livelihoods still depend on coal, oil and gas. Provide training, protection and new opportunities, especially for young people and women. Third, invest in grids, storage and efficiency. Renewables are surging, infrastructure must catch up fast. Fourth, meet all new electricity demand with clean power, including from the data centers driving the AI revolution. Technology must be part of the solution, not a new source of strain. And fifth, unlock finance at scale for developing countries. We must support developing countries to implement their commitment to transition away from fossil fuels through stronger cooperation, investment and technology transfer, and calibrate it to different capacities and dependencies.
These principles form the backbone of the decision now taking shape in Belém, decisions that will influence the planet for generations. As COP30 continues, expectations are high. The world is watching to see whether countries can turn ambition into action and provide the financial support, political courage and scientific alignment needed to confront the climate emergency. From forest and finance to energy transition and global equity, the debates unfolding in Belém are defining not only the next climate decade, but the future of our planet. You have been listening to Radio Algeria International's Technoverse and the Science Planet. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned for more next week.